exposed.
I know. Exposed. Dude, it's such a pain. But, let's see here. I'm going to try to get...
Yeah.
I can get close to this thing.
All of the podcasts I've done up before this, this is definitely the fanciest.
Fanciest of podcast setups. I stole it. Dad had all this stuff, and he's like, yeah. He's like, you just use it. I was like, sweet. And then I came in here, I was like moving stuff around and like replugging stuff in. And I saw him look at me. I was like, hey, did you mean use it? And he's like, well, yeah, I meant use it. And I was like, okay. I was like, then we're going to use it. So I've got it all kinds of spread out. But yeah, so let's just jump into this thing. So my thought is that this is the Pointman Podcast. We're going to be doing this once a week.
Yeah. Sitting
down, talking through the issues, the cool stuff that men face, godly men face, kind of every day going through life. So I want to introduce myself, and then Zach, you can introduce yourself. I'm Kendall Harness. I'm the campus pastor at that church in Cabot, but I'm also the executive pastor for that church as a whole. And I'm also in love with basketball and a bunch of stuff like that. Sports in general are my jam. And I like learning about how, men can follow God better. So that's pretty much me. I have 4 kids.
That's a lot of kids.
Yeah, under 4 under 4. Yeah, my oldest son turns 4.
That's a t-shirt.
This month. Yeah, I know. It's literally,
that's a t-shirt.
It's like, or like a menu item at Wendy's. Yeah. One of the two. but literally, so I've got 4 under 4 and an incredible wife named Nicole. And that's pretty much my whole life. That's all I do.
That's a lot.
So church and children, and that's all. What about you?
Yeah, I'm Zach. I don't work for that church, but I like to hang out with Pointman, so that's why I'm here. Yep, I have kids too. We Tarantino'd our kids, so we started at 15 and went backwards. So we got a 15-year-old and a 9-week-old at this point. So yeah, our life is interesting when it comes to children.
No joke.
I do like traditional sports and things like that, but I like all the weird sports too.
Yep.
So everything from disc golf to barbells, it's kind of, I'm all over the place. So things I like to do, to running long ways.
Running, yeah. I was just saying to running like 100 miles in a couple of days.
Honestly, whatever sounds like fun at the moment is kind of what I'm into, and then I'll move on to the next thing.
Snowboarding is next.
Honestly, if we had access, I think winter sports would have been something. But the one time I've been skiing, I was like, God, that was fun. I was like, how can we do this more often? And then I was like,
there's like no way. Close. Yeah.
It's like, it's going to be expensive if this becomes a thing. So
here in Arkansas, you don't get snow. You just get ice. So there's our.
But yeah, so that's me. Yeah.
Heck yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a podcast, and I think, and we're going to have different people, hopefully, eventually. Yeah. We're going to have different people on the show kind of come in and do different episodes and whatever else as we're talking through different things. I think that'd be really fun. But what we really wanted this to be is just a dialogue, kind of talking through this stuff, not necessarily a teaching, because we do that on the weekend, at that church, there's teachings, and then with semesters and all this kind of stuff we have going on with Pointman, the actual ministry, we've got a lot of those things. But this is more just a conversation about this stuff. So we might not have an arrival point. It might not be like, hey, this is, the final thought on this. It might just be, hey, the end of the conversation, that's just kind of where we stopped, and that's kind of it. And so tonight we are talking through kind of a man's need for significance. And so as we were talking about this kind of before, in the Garden of Eden, so God creates this place in Eden, Genesis chapter 1. He's like creating all these things, really cool. And God places Adam in the garden, and the first man to ever live. And he places him in there, and he gives him a job to tend to the garden and to take care of it, which would be significance for Adam. It's kind of where he finds his significance. But in Genesis chapter 3, when sin enters the world, we fall and sin enters and things are lost. And for, the serpent loses his legs, and the woman, it gains pain in childbirth and all those different things. But for man, I believe we lost our significance. Really, we lost it. And so from that point on, Adam and Eve are sent wandering into the world, kind of trying to figure out how to live. And Adam is searching for his significance. And I feel like every Bible character from then on is looking for their significance. So I don't know.
Nay, every man.
Right. Every guy. Yeah, exactly. Every guy. And so like, I feel like that we find our significance sometimes in things and in stuff and in achievements and whatever. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. At the same time, if it doesn't eventually connect back to God, that becomes an issue. What are your thoughts kind of on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I would challenge maybe even that, find that significance in things. It's short-lived and short-sighted.
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
A little bit. It's I definitely remember when I first got out of college and got that first job. Like,
oh yeah,
success was the thing.
Right.
Like, no matter what. I was actually thinking about this on the way over here because I wore a T-shirt to do a podcast for you guys. But I was thinking, it was like, there was a point in my life where I wore a suit every day.
Yeah,
and like my face was shaved every day. I still work in finance, but I work in a role now where I, that image and significance on success isn't the end all be all for my role. It's a support role. It's a help role versus that seeking success. So that kind of hit weird. I was just thinking about that on the way over here. I was like, I used to wear a suit every day. I would have had a suit and bow tie on to go do this thing 10 years ago. Yeah. And, it's just funny how, when we start to kind of move towards God and different things, I think in our life become less significant.
Right.
And we start to turn our focus towards other things.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and like, I know for me, like significance, like when I first got into ministry, so I got into ministry when I was really young. I was 19 years old when I first got into full-time ministry.
I was an idiot at 19, by the way.
I was still an idiot, but I was in ministry and I was an idiot, which is probably a bad combo. But I was really young, and so I got into ministry full-time, and I remember looking for, even in ministry, it's a biblical. I was a Christian. I was teaching Christian things, whatever else. But like, I remember looking for a feeling of significance even in that, and be like, hey, how can I do this and it make me feel significant? Even though I was doing most of the stuff for other people, at the end of the day, though, I wanted to feel a certain way. And I was like, man, I need something in this, which ultimately for me led to kind of a broken place, because I was needing something back out of the ministry. Instead of just doing ministry for, doing for the right reasons and for God and serving him, I was doing ministry for him, but at the same time for me. Yeah. I was like, I was doing student ministry at the time, and I boasted. I remember saying this, and I look back on it and cringe, but I remember being like, we have the largest student ministry in our city, which was cool to say. Cool. It was cool. And we did. It was the largest student ministry in our city. But at the same time, you sit there and you go, was that really for God's glory? Or was I just saying that because I needed that? And I was like, I need to hear that we have the largest student ministry in our city. And so those are things I look back on. I'm like, man, I was no doubt focused on my relationship with God for sure. At the same time, there was a part of me that was searching for something more from that ministry, something that was all right now.
Bam!
Amen.
Yeah, let's go.
Do it. But I mean, really, it's where I was as like, I think just as a man. I don't think it had anything to do with a leadership style or ability. It was just more so just like, this is where I'm at as a dude.
Yeah, I think we as guys have an ego. No matter if you're the most like humble person on earth, there's something that's gonna stroke it and really like set off. I talked about it the night I spoke at Pointman last semester. So we ran this race, and the goal was 100 miles. Leading up from July when we started training for this thing, I had no intention of winning. Like, my goal was just to run 100 miles. Right. As we got a little closer, it was like, the record's only 115. I think we can get the record.
I think we can get it.
And I never told anybody that. Like, my crew, everybody's like, oh, you only got so many more to 100. Right. I'm like, no, we're going to be here for all day. Like, we got it. Yeah. And it was just always this thing, and as the race went on, that ego, it kept turning like, oh, man, I know I'm in first. Like, I saw that guy stop and drink something a minute ago, and I kept going. I know I'm in first. As the night went on and things got tougher, that ego wasn't enough to drive me anymore.
Right.
And it got harder and harder for that to be the thing that kept me going and kept me going until at the end. It was like we failed. We didn't even get the first goal, but we stopped. We still ran a long way. Yeah, but we stopped a long way from where we were going to go.
Right.
And it's that ego. It's that significance. I wanted to be the guy who set the record. I wanted to run the 100 miles and put that sticker on something.
Absolutely.
But what it gave to me all it was going to do was make that ego bigger. And then it would have been, we got to do something harder. We got to do this. We got to do that.
The truth. Well, and I don't know what else could be harder than running 100 miles in 24 hours, but still, that's insane.
There are people who do a lot crazier stuff than that.
It's insane. But I look at it for us guys and I go, okay, that mentality, as much as when channeled in the wrong direction, is for sure a problem, or can be a problem. Because, for instance, you see the guys that are sold out to their career, and like I say, nothing wrong with having a career, nothing wrong with wanting to better your career. I think that's a great thing.
I think you would be doing a disservice to yourself if you didn't want to succeed in your career. Yeah. Not absolutely. To say that that's not something to aspire to.
Right. Yeah. Well, and scripture's very clear. It's like, do everything as if you were doing it for the Lord. It's like, well, everything would mean that, I even my job and I work hard and give it my all and blah, blah, blah. I think it's absolutely true. At the same time, I look at it and I go, so the question then comes up is it really the fact that, we as men have an ego problem? Or is it more so the fact that we have a focus problem? And for instance, like direction. So when I was a kid growing up, I was a super pain in the butt kid. I got kicked out of VBX at my dad's church. So like I was the pastor's kid and was kicked out of VBX. So I was a pain in the rear as a child. But my dad always said something to me that I thought was interesting. And as a kid, I didn't really care, but as I've grown older, I'm like, he's like, if we can get you pointed in the right direction, that hard-headedness will actually help you later. Which he's a pastor, so he knew like how hard it would be and stuff like that. And so he's like, okay, if we can just get you pointed in the right direction. So my question to you, is, do you think that there is a point where that ego is dangerous, or do you think it's just more so a focus problem?
I think the ego is always dangerous. So that's something, it's on my prayer journal every night, is like that I don't have ego in what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because every time I switch something that I want to accomplish or do something, I'll start like, I'm going to be the best at that, or I want to do that. And I think that the ego in that is the problem. I don't think success necessarily, or pointing your success at being the best minister you can be, or being the best lawyer. I don't know.
Sure, whatever.
But I do think that being prideful in it, and that ego that like, I am the best. I did succeed. I think that's the problem. So I think they're two different things. I think that, the drive and the want to do these things as men, to be significant in our role, I think that's important, and I think that's where your focus comes in. I think taking the ego out of it and the I out of it is the part that we as guys a lot of times have a hard time doing.
Sure. No, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. And so something I threw down on this document that we got going is significance is hard to attain. Many strive for it, but few attain it. Why do we think that is? Because I see guys throw themselves into everything, even to a somewhat sad extreme, their children's sport ability. I see
that drives me nuts.
It's so sad, dude. It's like, it's hard to watch because you're like, you watch this dad who obviously wants what's best for his son. Like, obviously that's the main drive. At the same time, he probably can't see it, but he can't help to admit that part of that's his desire to succeed.
Yeah, the kid one's funny to me. I think it's great. I have two brothers and a sister, and our entire life we all played competitive sports.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our dad coached my two younger brothers. He didn't coach me, but we got a good, like, he never really like lived vicarious through us. Like we were pretty good. Now we practiced and played way too much as kids, but yeah, that's weird. I think it's funny. I think that, I don't know.
Well,
and it's hard.
And I think that when it comes down
to, what was your question again?
So guys,
I think I just went on like had a flashback of just dad being kind of cool about it. Yeah.
I gotta go back to the question. Yeah. He says it's just significance is hard to attain, which obviously, I mean, significant. If we lost it in the garden, significance would be very difficult to attain, because the curse on Adam in Genesis chapter 3 is he says you're gonna have to work the ground, and you will work to scratch a living from the ground, which you're like, okay, wait a second, what does that mean to significance? Well, in reading it, I sit there and I'm like, okay, for Adam, what this meant is his job early on in the garden was to tend to the garden.
Make sure it didn't fail.
Right. So the garden was going to grow on its own. That was its deal. Its job was to grow. But now after the curse, Adam is to work for the ground. So instead of the ground working for Adam, Adam would work for the ground.
So more like being responsible for the gift given versus having to develop it.
Right. Well, and
not like, develop the gift, but to develop, food absolutely. For your family on its own.
Absolutely. Well, the purpose, a tree in the Garden of Eden had a purpose, and that purpose was to produce food and fruit for Adam. Mm-hmm. What God's saying is now that relationship between God and Adam and Eve was broken, and they were kicked out of Eden, which actually was an act of saving them from, sealing their fate forever. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. We can get in that later. But the point is that when he kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden, and in the ground outside of the Garden of Eden was cursed, now instead of the purpose of the tree being to produce fruit for Adam, now Adam's purpose was to work for the tree, right? Which is to work to produce to work to help the tree produce fruit, which is a big switch actually in Adam's purpose now. Instead of Adam's purpose being God's tender to the garden, now Adam's purpose is to try to scratch a living from this ground that's not going to want to produce for you, which obviously is a showing of what it's like to live outside of God's will and those types of things. But I asked the question, since significance is so hard to attain, like why do we believe significance is so difficult? Other than obviously there's the biblical side of things with the curse that came along with it. But for an everyday man, we throw our I'm trying to say this. We throw ourselves into things seeking significance, seeking to become significant, to be significant. In that, even in those things, though, even if you just look at those things, career, sports, our kids' sports, or even our family, our, whatever, even in those things, why is significance just so elusive even in those?
I think I've circled back on my train of thought there. So I wasn't totally losing it.
You were there. You're there.
Yeah. I think it's, where I was going with that was that, in the end, he was just supportive of the fact that we were doing things. And so I think he wasn't putting his significance, like his significance was in the fact that his kids were enjoying what they were doing. Right. Like he was providing for his family. He was doing those things. And so his kids were getting to do what they wanted to do. Yeah. But, on the flip side, my oldest son plays basketball now and I go to these games and guys, it's 3A basketball. Right. Like it's no offense to all the 3A basketball players out there. It's not exciting basketball most of the time. Like, watching them play and these guys, you can just tell the ones that are like, they would miss everything in their life.
Right.
Everything that was important to them and their family to watch this kid play basketball for 20 minutes. Yeah. I think it's great to support your kids. And I go to all of my kids' games too. But like, he's either going to make it or he's not. That's his significance. It's not mine.
Right.
If he decided he didn't want to play ball at all anymore and wanted to take up dance or something, that would be his significance. I think that's the thing when it comes to us pouring into our kids or doing something like trying to find our significance in someone else and not in what we're called to do.
Sure.
And, I think for me, for a long time, I would move my significance or where I thought it was going to be. I was an athlete. Right. So I put it in the athlete bucket. Yeah. And then there was a stretch where it was, I'm going to be successful in business. So it was in this occupational bucket. Yeah. Then it could have been like our diving into family. Like we went through the adoption process and that's time consuming and like a job on its own. It's almost like diving into that where it's like, this is what I do now. Like, right. I care for these kids. And, I think we just glom on it. Glom.
Bounce. Yeah. I like
grab
it.
On, lock on. Yeah, lock on to these things that we're doing at times. And, that I've done some physical challenges and some things in the past when I first got into like that world. I did it because I wanted to become a professional at that thing. Sure. So that was my goal. And, as I've gotten a little bit older and I'm kind of aged out of that space, it's like now I look back and I'm like, how stupid were you? Sure. Like your significance or your focus should have been over here. This is something fun you get to do. Sure. It's like, and now used to if I had to miss a session of something, it would crush me. Yeah. Like I physically and mentally would not be able to do anything else for it literally would break me. And, now it's like, oh, okay, it's Tuesday and the kid's crying. I can't go do that. Sure. And, it's like my significance now is like, I have a family. I have these things I have to pay attention to. Yeah. But I think it's hard for us as men to give up and move to that next stage. I think that's where you talk about it's hard to find that significance or obtain that significance. I think we put it in these wrong places a lot of times. The thing that looks cool, the thing that feels cool, not all the time is going to be where you're called to be.
Absolutely. Well, and I think now as we're kind of talking this through, I'm even thinking about this more, and I'm completely morphing from the notes. I'm like completely getting off subject, but I sit there and I'm like, so when I think about your significance and I think about, okay, as a man, we place significance, like you say, in a lot of places that may not be wrong, but I think that they won't ever fully provide what you need. So, for instance, I say this all the time. We just went through a marriage series at church, and I was talking about, married people. If you place the full burden of everything you need on your spouse, you'll crush your spouse.
Yeah.
Like no matter how good of a person they are, like you could have the best wife on the planet and she's amazing. But if you put the full weight of everything you need, both mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally on her, and none of that's going towards God, then you'll crush her. Like there's nothing she can do. Or you may be the best husband in the world, but if your wife puts that kind of pressure on you, it'll crush you. And so the more I think about it, for men, our desire to feel significant in our lives leads us to make decisions sometimes that seem silly. So, for instance, a guy that dumps, millions of dollars into a hobby or whatever, or hundreds of thousands of dollars into a hobby, or he, leverages his house to pay for his car, or whatever. You're like, that seems ridiculous. Like what are you doing? Like the trailer park
Corvette.
Yeah, exactly. So somebody's living in a trailer park or in a box, but they're driving a Corvette.
That's to do with the Corvette.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that's a significance thing, though. It's like I want to feel significant. I feel significant driving the Corvette, so I'll leverage everything to be able to afford it. Like I'll sell the house. I'll whatever else. Decisions that we make, or even it's the dad at the ball field who is just being plumb ridiculous, and you're like, dude, you're being ridiculous. And in his mind, he's going, but I
care for him.
Yeah, I
care for my kid. Yeah,
exactly. And I think there's a line there. I do agree that caring for your kid and all that stuff's great, but at the same time, there is a line where it becomes more about you than it is about them. But I think that when it comes to significance, like I say, our desire for that can sometimes make us make decisions that make us look crazy or silly or whatever. Even the people that have devoted their lives to something, and it just eats up everything. They can't do anything else except for that one thing. It's very difficult to kind of do that. So on the flip side of that, let's look at it and go, okay, how do we attain significance and real significance that will actually last in our lives? And I think the only way that you can really attain lasting significance, because, owning a giant business that makes millions and millions of dollars will provide you temporary significance. Like, being Mr. Universe.
You're important.
Yeah, being Mr. Universe, winning that competition, you're significant. Like, that's a big deal. But at some point, there's another Mr. Universe. Yeah. At some point, you get old and things sag and you get overweight, and that's just how it works. It's like, hey, it's just a part of it. But I'll say this, though, is that, like, so how do we attain that lasting? Well, lasting would be through a relationship with Christ and ultimately contributing to God's mission in some way, which for some people is going to look different than others. It's like, how do you contribute to God's mission? I think that's the question that every person has to ask themselves, especially every man has to ask themselves, how am I personally contributing to God's mission in the world? And like I say, some people they're a preacher and they're up on stage and they're speaking or whatever. But I would say by and large, that's not most people.
No.
Most people are contributing to God's mission in a more practical way, which is like, just speaking to your coworker about Christ, as simple as that may sound, is a huge piece of how the gospel moves forward. So I don't know. That's just.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of it's the turning pro mentality?
No.
I think
Tell me
it's
about
Stephen Pressfield, War of Art. So it's a book. He's a writer, but he has this mentality that you turn pro in everything you do. So I think that just hearing you talk about that, I think almost like a redemption story.
Yeah.
The misplaced significance that you've experienced in your life can also lead to proper place significance in ministry. So just on a super practical level, if you're talking about a guy who wanted to be a craftsman of some kind forever, and that's what they focus on, that's what they did everything in.
Sure.
They may have an opportunity to let's back up.
Yeah.
Auto mechanic, someone who loves to work on cars. You sent out an email the other day wanting to build some cars.
Hey, I want to build a drift track.
Cars.
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, if you spent your entire life becoming the best auto mechanic out there, surely you can build a go-kart.
Yeah. Well, I think about in scripture, a shepherd boy who slung a sling, and that's how he fought off, David fights off the bear and the lion and all that with the slingshot. And then one day, after all that practice of becoming the best slingshot thrower he could be, he faces a giant named Goliath and he takes him down with a slingshot. And it's like, like, I don't think, and this is where I think that line is, I think you have to go, okay, becoming good at something, becoming a pro at something is not wrong. Being like, hey, I want to be, even the mentality.
And the mentality, the point of he's trying to make there isn't so much that you're going to become a pro.
Right.
It's that whenever you attack a challenge, you attack it like a pro.
Right.
So if you go into anything in life, if you stepped into ministry in some way, even if it was just shaking hands at the front door on Sunday, then shake them like a pro. Don't miss one. Make it your goal to say hi to every person that walks through your door that day. And so that's what he's saying there. It's not so much what I was trying to equate it to is like you've spent your whole life trying to turn pro in this thing. Now let's use that thing to turn pro in something else. So if auto mechanic, just a super simple one, but even if it's like, I know for me, we coached classes for years, how to lift, how to CrossFit, all of the different fitnesses, and being able to convey thoughts in real time, seeing things happen and making those decisions and helping people in a physical aspect, but it also helps you on your feet enough to when you're having those conversations and questions get crazy.
You're right.
You may not know the answer, but you know how to respond.
No, that's right.
And I think that's just another example of, we turned pro in that thing. We were professional coaches. That's what we did with our time. We don't do that anymore, but we do stuff like this. Yeah. Where we sit here and we have these conversations. And I say we, my family. And so I think that's kind of where like me, when I think about that changing where my significance and my focus is, that's where that kind of comes from. Is like not being upset that I spent that time in my life not focused on the right thing, but utilizing it going forward.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that like when it comes down to it, there's things we do, and I think like scripture says, you do everything as if you're doing it for the Lord. So you want to be doing those things well. You want to be putting your all into it. You want to be doing them the right way, all those things. And when you're doing things the right way, typically success follows. I mean, typically it's when we're cutting corners that we see that people lose. I mean, that's usually what ends up happening. But if we're doing things the right way, we're executing the way God calls us to execute, then from there, usually we typically have success in even in business and different things like that. I've seen it 100 times where a guy has a business or whatever that, he just operates with integrity and he operates with, godly values, and all of a sudden his business is exploding. You're like, what happened? Well, he's living right and God's blessing him in that, and those are incredible things. We have several guys at the church that own businesses here in Sherwood and all around that are ginormous. And you're like, well, how'd that success get there? It's like, well, a lot of it was a lot of hard work, but at the same time, some of it's, hey man, you're living right for God. You're living the way God's asked you to live, and man, he grants increase. He grants success. I mean, Paul, even in scripture, he makes tents for a living. That's what he does. I mean, that's his living. And then he did ministry on the side, actually. So a lot of people talk about, full-time pastors being more equated to like a Paul guy, but actually Paul was a bivocational guy. He's a guy that he was, working for God, but he was doing that really on the side. He was a tent maker full time. That was his living. He wasn't making money as a pastor. He was making money as a tent maker. And the deal is that, I think the cool thing about Paul having that particular story is that, was Paul's significance in tent making? No. But at the same time, was Paul a good tent maker? I would probably say, I would
if he kept doing it.
He was good at it. Yeah, he was probably good at it, and people paid him to do it. It's like he was good at that. He was disciplined in it. He cared about it. But that wasn't what Paul did, all the time. His significance was found in serving God. Now, again, that's where when we talk about significance, if you want lasting significance, that'll last. Again, you can find significance in anything. And I think if you do it well enough or whatever, you could find a way to make that thing make you feel significant, or that person or whatever, it's like, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you want something that will last, the only way to have something that will last is if will have eternal value.
Yeah.
Which is the question.
That's what I was about to say. So, I mean, you can look all over the place and see success.
Yeah.
Without the eternal.
No, you're right.
Portion. I mean, everybody likes to throw the Hollywood term out, but it's just an easy pick. Like, look at all of the people and all the money and all the success that those people have. You see it on TV shows that glorify, like investment bankers or these like real kind of clean on the outside, scummy on the inside type people that we come to kind of know.
Yeah.
But I was lost my train of thought again, man. This afternoon's, dude.
It's killing you.
Yeah, but they lack the eternal.
Sure. Yeah, the internal investment. Yeah. We're back.
They lack the internal, like their goals are short term.
Right.
Their goals are 50-year goals. They're not 5 trillion year goals.
Right.
Like when we make decisions as Christian men, we make decisions for eternity, like you say, not for 50 years. Like 50 years is where we're making like, can we pay our mortgage in 50 years?
Right.
In 51, it's irrelevant.
Right.
Because we're on to a new home.
Right. Well, and at the end of the day, you sit there and you go like a mortgage or whatever else, paying down your debt and stuff like that's really good. It's really awesome. But at the end of the day, if you died, 20 years into a 30-year mortgage, then that mortgage really wouldn't matter for that much for eternity. You're like, who would care if you paid it off or not? Not to say that you shouldn't pay off your mortgage. Obviously, pay your bills. But the point being is that, now if you're like, Pastor Kendall said, I don't have to pay my mortgage anymore. But that's what he said on the podcast. I was listening. But more so the point being is that, is I think in our lives, every single thing that we have should somewhat be weighed by that metric. Like, will this matter in eternity? And if it won't, then I don't think you need to spend a lot of time worrying about it. Like, I think people spend a lot of time worrying and focused on things that at the end of the day may provide them temporary significance if it goes well. But at the end of the day, if the business died tomorrow, will it make a lick of difference in an eternal perspective? Most likely not. It might. I mean, if you're using your platform to reach other people for Christ or whatever, that may make a difference that way. But if you're not, then it really wouldn't matter either way. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. I was trying to look down here to see if we have anything else that I really wanted to cover. So let's ask the question. So your significance, if you're finding your significance in God, what does that look like lived out? Like what does it practically look like for you to be a Christian man who's living for God, no matter what your career field or it may be? Everybody, I love we